started then. It's a few minutes past 1. Let's get started. Thank you everybody so much for joining us on our webinar today, where we're going to be talking about the EX maturity path and hot off the press, our all new EX maturity measure, which we're very excited about. I'm going to hand over to Bea in a sec just to kind of give you a little bit about background about how we got to where we are today, the journey we've been on, and a big thank you to those of you who've helped us to kind of get to this place. Plenty of time for questions as well. By the way, I should say my name is Emma Bridger. The great thing about Zoom is it tells you who everyone's name is, which I think is just a genius part of Zoom. So my name's Emma. Run a company called People Lab with my colleague Katie. We're an employee experience and engagement consultancy, and also recently co-founded the EX Space, which I've told quite a few of you about already, which is going to be a learning-led community for people like us to finally have somewhere to get together, to talk, to share, to collaborate on all things employee experience and engagement. So really excited about that, and that's launching in about 2 months, hopefully, fingers crossed, if we can get to that point. So if you haven't kind of signed up already for info on that, then please do. So Bea, do you want to give it a little bit of background about yourself before we get into the meat and bones of the session?
Yeah, fantastic. So Belinda, I am a director of culture and experience activation agency Fathom XP, and also co-author with Emma of the book Over My Shoulder, Employee Experience by Design, How to Create an Effective EX for Competitive Advantage. So let me, I wanted to sort of dig into the little bit about background about what brought us to talk about employee experience maturity today. We've just got a few slides, not many. We're just going to give you a little bit of a flavour of what the EX maturity path and the EX maturity measure are going to look like. So we began, Emma and I began working on the book about 2 or 3 years ago now. And in the process, we started to think, if you like, about employee experience maturity and what that might mean. And we sort of struggled with it, and we touched on it in the book. In the process of writing the book, we also came across an amazing community of employee experience pioneers around the world. And many of these people became contributors to the book. And when the book was published, it felt too soon to say goodbye to this little community that was beginning to become about. So we actually had a few virtual sessions where we connected all the various contributors to the book. And these pioneers decided what would be really good use of their time when coming together, rather than just chatting, was actually to create a tangible tool or asset, something that could help people like them in their early or perhaps more mature phases of employee experience design. So this led us to come up with this idea of the employee experience maturity path, which is the model that you can see in the middle picture there. So that we produced version 1, the prototype of that, maybe a year ago, something like that, and put it out there into the world. And the next time the EX Design Club came together, we sort of talked about the fact that wouldn't it be good to create some sort of tool that allows people to interrogate or go deeper, work with this maturity path in some way. So that really led to the birth of the employee experience maturity measure. So this is a way of, as I said, interrogating, thinking about working, turning the path into something really practical. And that's what we're going to be sharing with you today. And the last stage of that, we've been really lucky to be able to put this to work and use this with a number of our client organizations, both in terms of facilitating dialogue around employee experience, making the business case, and also helping them come up with a more strategic approach to really think about where to focus to shift the dial on the experience that their people are having. So that's what's brought us to this point today. So if your question next is, what do you even mean by employee experience maturity? It's a very fair question. For us, it's really about the approach that an organization takes to employee experience. It is distinct to the experience that people have as a result of it. Obviously, the two things are related, but what we're really talking about today and what we really talk about in the path and what we explore in the EX maturity measure is the approach itself. And that really comes down to what and how you do it, how you go about thinking about and tackling and shifting the dial on employee experience. It's about who's involved and also how you understand, if you understand, the impact of your efforts in employee experience. This whole phrase, employee experience maturity, can be a little bit contentious, if you like. I think it's really important for us to say that we are not trying to overlay a rigid model on top of everything else, or a benchmark. It's very much about creating a framework for thinking and discussion. That's what we're really talking about with both the EX maturity path and also the EX maturity measure. So it's contextual and subject. Industry, maturity of the organization, size of the organization, location, all sorts of things will dictate exactly what employee experience maturity looks like. So we 100% acknowledge that it is contextual and subjective. What we're trying to do with the introduction of these two pieces of work is to stimulate a conversation and hopefully drive some thinking and some action. So acknowledging that this is disparate and it shows up differently in different parts of different types of organizations, what we do know from the work that we've done that there are consistency across 4 elements. A mature approach to employee experience tends to show a degree of maturity in 4 elements of focus, mindset, involvement, and impact. And we'll dig in a little bit deeper into those in just a minute. So capability, skills and expertise, times by practice, application of those things in these 4 elements are really what we see lead to a more mature employee experience approach. So we now think about levels of maturity, or stages of maturity, if you like. And we talk about them in terms of forming, performing, and transforming. So I'll just give you a little bit of a flavor of what those look like, what maturity looks like across those different levels. So we divide that into what's happening behind the scenes and then what's happening for our people. So thinking about what's happening behind the scenes in this forming area, I've already talked about EX pioneers, and that's very much been our experience in recent years, is that the approach to employee experience often starts with a few pioneers really championing new ways of working. That's individuals and small groups as well. Necessarily, this is kind of disjointed and a little bit sporadic, and the focus tends to be on quick wins, what's broken that we can very quickly fix. That doesn't mean that it's not effective. It definitely creates a better experience, but in pockets, if you like, a little bit ad hoc, but not very joined up. Organizations in this forming stage tend to have only basic people data and people feedback. And there tends to be a desire to jump to solutions very, very quickly, probably because they're moving at pace and need to demonstrate some effectiveness very, very quickly. So tend to jump to solutions very quickly. The experience that people have reflects that. Its experience is disjointed and inconsistent, both within your own time in an organization and also when you look at fellow team members and different, in your own team or other teams as well, you can see that the experience different people have is very different. So in looking now at the performing stage, you can see here that what you get is you tend to see these slightly large groups, more established collaborators. That's not necessarily there's a massive team, but the people that our pioneers can tap into and work with are more established group of collaborators, whether that's people in HR, in internal comms, in L&D, whatever it might be. There's more of a sort of a cohesive group of collaborators around this, working on simple employee journeys. Things like onboarding, we often see people starting with onboarding, although it's owned by different groups of people, which make it slightly complex. It is a relatively straightforward and time-boxed journey. Other tools tend to come into play here, things like very basic personas. And these groups tend to be focusing on, yes, journeys, but tackling or trying to improve discrete moments within a journey owned by a single team. So for instance, might be tackling, rather than the entire onboarding journey, you might end up tackling that day one experience or creating a particular checklist or something very discrete within that journey. When you see with performing organizations in terms of employee experience maturity, is that on the whole, people are having a pretty good time. The experience feels joined up, and there are some real distinct high points along the way. So looking at this sort of more advanced level of maturity, here you see multifunctional teams, and that can be, HR, design people, data people, a whole range of people working in these more multifunctional EX focused teams, working on complex journeys. So not the so maybe they're tackling the whole of the onboarding journey rather than just a discrete bit of it. They might even be tackling something like a whole new platform or system rollout and thinking that through that from a very human-centered design approach. So much more complex journeys are owned by a variety of different teams. And these teams are able to tackle, operate in multiple dimensions at once. Maybe there's even a cultural change type of element to this as well. So really thinking through very complex elements of employee experience and working across all dimensions. They've still got personas, obviously, but they're much more behavioral and attitudinal rather than the pure sort of demographic level. So a little bit more advanced. And the end result for our people is that we're able to create much more tailored experiences for our people, but also the experience that people have working for these organizations is really, really joined up. And it's also, I think, interestingly, very much in line with the promise that's made to them at the point they're thinking about joining, or the promise that they see articulated through employer branding on LinkedIn, Glassdoor, whatever it may be. So it's very joined up, very coherent and very consistent. So that's what we mean by the 3 different levels of employee experience maturity. And there's lots more detail on that. Before I hand back to Emma, I'm just going to touch very quickly on the 4 elements. I talked at the very beginning about the 4 key elements of that define where maturity sits across employee experience maturity. The first one is focus. So it isn't just about where you put your time and your energy, but how you make that decision. So you might want to think about this in terms of being a strategic approach, I guess. So you don't just fix things that are broken, you fix the things that can have the biggest impact. You might not even be fixing something. It might be something completely additional to the mix that's not there already, but you really know what's going to shift the dial, and that's where you focus. So focus is our first element. Our second element is around mindset. For me, this is very much around language, but it's not just, I think language is a symptom of a lot more that's going on deeper within an organization. So rather than talking about processes and programs and people as resources, here the language and employee experience mindset is much more about individual needs. It's about emotions, and it's about creating experiences. The third element that we talk about when we talk about employee experience maturity is involvement. This is around the stakeholders. Who's involved in prioritizing employee experience, about choosing what to work on and working on it? Are they accessible, involved, championing it at the right time and at the right level of the organization? So involvement, a massive one. And no surprise, our last element here is impact. This is how you go about measuring, evaluating, understanding the impact that you're having on the experience that your people have within the organization. So those are the 4 key elements of employee experience maturity. Again, you'll find lots more details of them in both the maturity path and also the measure as well, where we go into some questions around each of those 4 areas. Emma, I think it's back to you.
Oh, thank you, Bea. Katie, have we got any questions coming in as yet, just before I kind of get into the actual measure itself?
No questions as yet, but that's a great prompt to remind people. If you have any questions throughout, please feel free to pop them in the chat, and we will go through them throughout the session.
Thank you. Okay, so Bea's just given you a whistle-stop tour of the maturity path, which we very much developed with the EX Design Club. And you know, we had some really good feedback on it, and it was really useful. But the question we kept asking was, well, you know, how can I tell where I'm at on this path? And we realized that the work we'd done, we could kind of evolve it a little bit further to develop what we're calling the EX maturity measure. And the purpose of this measure is to give you an understanding of how mature your overall approach is to EX. So where might I sit on that path? Am I informing, am I performing, or am I transforming? But equally, what we've done is also break it down into those 4 component elements that Bea talked about. So you can also look at how mature is my focus, my mindset, my involvement, my impact, to give you a little bit more kind of direction on where you want to maybe, you know, put your energy in terms of, you know, evolving your approach to EX. So that's very much what we wanted to do. Now, what I would say at the outset is this isn't as a psychologist, I have to point this out, it isn't a kind of reliable and valid psychometric, because that would take kind of years to develop, and also to have a reliable a valid psychometric like you have, for example, with intelligence, with IQ, you have to have a very clear and agreed upon definition of what it is you're measuring. And we know with EX, we don't have that, and nor do we want it either, because as B said at the beginning, employee experience is very context specific. It's very specific to, it's very subjective. So we kind of don't really want to have that, you know, that kind of one size fits all, this is what it is, therefore we can measure it. So what we've developed is not a kind of reliable, valid diagnostic tool, but hopefully a helpful measure as a self-reported measure, just to give you a sense of where your approach might be. And as B said at the beginning, to give you that springboard for conversation. So it's kind of a starting point, it's a framework, it's a springboard for conversation, which is why we have chosen to go this way with the questions, or the items, as we say in psychology. So usually when you have a questionnaire, you know, a quantitative diagnostic, you'd have like a single question, and you'd often have a kind of what we call a Likert scale in psychology. So 1 to 5, the strongly disagree, strongly agree. We wanted this to be much more of kind of a tool for conversation and really thinking and reflection, as much as just tell me where I am on the measure. So we've taken quite a different approach here. And what you see here is that if we take these 3 questions, which is what's happening for employees, what's happening behind the scenes, so we're calling these the big picture measures, we've got kind of opposite ends of the scale questions. So let's take this first one, what's happening for employees. So at one end of the scale, we've got, considering the data we have on our employees' experience, their experience can be rated as poor, through to the other end, which is considering the data we have on our employees' experience, their experience can be rated as very good. And you're going to mark yourselves somewhere between those 2 points. So let's take the bottom one actually as a good example. So what's happening behind the scenes? So we jump straight to solutions to improve our EX, basing them on our assumptions about what will work rather than data, versus we spend some time understanding the experience and we're designing from the perspective of our people, using insights to inform our solutions. So most of you will have a pretty good feel as to where you think you might sit on that scale. So you might say, we are absolutely at that far left. We're at that number 1. We're going for that. Everything we do at the moment, we're just doing it kind of based on what we think we should be doing, what we think will work. There's no data involved. We're just kind of, you know, giving it a well-intentioned best shot, but this, you know, that's absolutely where we are. Versus a number 10 would be, yeah, we've got really amazing insights. We use behavioral personas. We absolutely know our people inside out. And I'm not just talking an annual survey. We've really spent time getting to know them in a way that our customer experience colleagues would get to know their customers. We do the same for our people. You know, we absolutely know what makes them tick at a kind of psychological level. And we use this data to inform where we go with solutions. So that would be number 10. And you can have a guess as to where you would be at between the 2. So we've deliberately formulated the diagnostic, well, not diagnostic, the measure in this way as a kind of a reflection tool, and just to get you thinking about where would I be between those 2 positions. That's the idea behind it. So what we've done is we've got a few questions for the big picture measures, and then we've got questions, they'll all be in the follow-up email that you'll receive that's got the measure in it. You'll have questions on focus. I'm not going to talk through them all now. So 3 questions on focus there. We've got 3 questions on mindset. And again, you know, figure out where you are between the 2 positions. So a good one here. Mindset. We still talk about human resources rather than people. And we think about programs and projects first, versus we talk about the needs and motivations of our people first and spend time getting curious about them. So as I said, it's not a kind of a traditional psychological diagnostic. It's there as a tool for reflection to get you thinking about where you might be. And then we've got 3 questions on involvement. And again, you'll get all of this in the follow-up email with the measure in it. And finally, we've got 3 questions on impact. And there are instructions in the measure in terms of how to use it. So it's a very simple kind of add them together and then divide by the total number of questions. So you can divide by 15 your total score to get you an average as a whole. And we've given an indication as to, I think we've said kind of 1 to 3 is forming, 4 to 7 is performing, and 8 to 10 is transforming. So it'll give you an average score and you'll be able to see where you sit on that scale. But also you can take the questions on each of the elements here. So you can add up your 3 scores for impact, divide by 3, and that will give you a score for impact. So if you want to look at the elements specifically, you can do that as well. So we've very much designed it to give you, I guess, insights into how you're doing with your approach. And as B said, also as part of the follow-up, we've also given a very high level starter for 10 on the so what. So if you're not scoring so well on impacts, what might you want to do about that? So give me some kind of first kind of cut of ideas as to how you might want to address a low scoring, an immature impact score, or a low scoring involvement score, whatever it might be. So hopefully a bit more value add on that as well. That was one of the other pieces of feedback we got from that. So I'm just going to, before we do that, actually, I'm just going to come off sharing my screen. I'm going to ask lovely Margarita. Margarita is someone we work with in an organisation, probably, I don't know how long ago it was, last year, let's say last year. Margarita, you actually use this tool with your organisation. So it would be great if you could just share a few thoughts on how useful or not you found the tool and how you used it in your organisation. If you're there and able to unmute for me, that would be brilliant.
Yeah. Well, I think it was in different stages, useful in different ways. At the beginning, I think it was very much self-reflection driven, because it kind of allowed us to think individually, all of us who were participating, what we weren't seeing, because sometimes we focus too much on one part of the experience, or we focus specifically on one part of the life cycle as of the whole of the elements that impact experience. So I think at the beginning, when you're self-reflecting, that's quite important. It kind of like removes yourself from your assumptions and allows you to think, okay, we might need to focus on this. I think at a second stage, just sharing and seeing the results of joint analysis is quite interesting, because in some stages you will think, okay, it seems like everyone is thinking pretty much the same as I am thinking, or in some others, oh, I didn't think about this, but that makes sense, which is like a second level of removing your assumptions. And then the third part is the conversation part of it, and coming to decision making and action planning, which I think is quite interesting, because I don't want to overstate this, but it's a third level of removing assumptions. And when you're doing human-centered design, I think that's the most important part of it. And for me, having 3 levels of removing my assumptions was great, because I was leading at that point the efforts that where we would focus. And regardless of me telling myself every single day, is this an assumption or not, I ended up, as every human being, still having assumptions. So I think that was quite interesting. It allowed us to see a holistic view, and it allowed us to action plan on where it truly mattered. And I really enjoyed the tool. I hadn't seen anything in the market that was actually really measuring experience per se. So it was quite useful. And I think that we haven't had the opportunity yet, but it would be great to see kind of how it evolves with time, and kind of like where the colors move around.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you for sharing that, Margarita. I really love the way that you explained how you used it at different points on the journey. I think I hadn't really thought of that before, even though I went through this journey with you. But yeah, that makes absolute sense. I hadn't really kind of taken note of that. So thank you for that. But have you got any comments on Margarita's story there?
Yeah, I think it's really beautifully explained. Thanks, Margarita. And I think what was interesting, the work that we did together, is that your EX tribe, if you like, were EX leaders, or even not necessarily people with that role, that name and their job title, but that came together from around the globe. So people who had an interest or responsibility for employee experience in some dimension, in actually a range of different, not just parts of the organization, but potentially even different companies within the umbrella organization. So it was interesting to see how it brought the conversation to one place. rather than being open to interpretation. And when somebody's talking about employee experience, they're talking about this, and somebody else is talking about this. It provided that sort of focus, but it wasn't too narrow because it's got these 4 dimensions. It gave this sort of like enough of a range to enable a really rich conversation, I think, but still bringing people into one conversation.
Yeah, and I would say if we compare, it's completely true. None of the people who were involved in this group were actually EX practitioners, but EX advocates, EX champions, EX, call it as you'd like. They were working towards impacting EX. So what was great is that at the beginning, when we were doing this brainstorming of what matters, where do we need to focus, it was a lot, and it felt really much of everyone's opinion. And as you said, it was a very global team, a very global group, which were bringing their daily own experiences. So that's why I talk about assumptions, because after that, we could really narrow the conversation and say, okay, definitely that's nothing that we need to disregard. It's still there, but in a holistic view, global, that impacts all employees, this is what we have, and this is where we need to focus. And starting from there, our conversation became much more aligned.
Fantastic. Thank you. I had another early contributor to the EX Design Club who tested our prototype, sent me some nice points this morning, and talking about how it was a baseline. It gave you a baseline to thinking about a starting point for expanding the EX approach. And she said even the questions make you stop and think about where you're focusing is enough to make an impact. So again, it's that idea of a thinking tool and a conversational starting point, or not a leveler, but a focus point to bring something that can be quite subjective to quite a clear place to have a meaningful dialogue.
Yeah, I think it just helps to kind of, look behind the curtain, because we always talk about EX feeling quite big and overwhelming, and it means so many different things. I just think it's just that, okay, that's what you mean by a more mature approach. It's just a great way of explaining it, I think. And that's what, as you say, B, we did use it with a number of kind of I call friends and family who tested it out for us. And in the spirit of what EX by Design is all about, this is an iteration, right? And we are absolutely up for experimenting further, and all of you using it and telling us how you get on and what works, what doesn't work, and evolving it further. It's not like, that's done now. We're really up for kind of, moving it further forward. So let us know how you get on. But yeah, B, should we go to the poll now? We're doing poll, aren't we?
We've got some questions, actually. We're going to do the poll towards the end, but we've got some questions in the chat. All righty, so I'm just looking at some of these questions. Let's go back here. So do you want me to jump in with one? Yeah, go on then, you go for one. Julie, I don't want to put you on the spot, but Julie, so Julie's question is this: we've been chatting about an EX blueprint. Would you say this is aligned to the focus element? I always think this phrase blueprint is really interesting. I mean, it can mean something very specific and well defined, and it can also mean lots and lots of different things. Do you mind Julie, if you just explain what you mean when you talk about an EX blueprint, what it is that you're referring to?
Sure. And Emma and I were chatting about this last week. And I think that's why I am asking the question, because I think it can mean different things to different people. So when I first started looking at, I was, I guess, asked to take on this role, and it was, we need a roadmap, we need a blueprint, the what, the how, the why. And because it's such a huge topic, it kind of touches everything in organizational life effectively. I've just been curious to see where, when you kind of look at the maturity measure, a lot of people are doing something around the employee experience all the time. And then it matures into having people dedicated to employee experience, and kind of, I think it can resonate a lot where we're doing things that probably are at all different points of the maturity model, but a lot of it still is let's focus on this, let's do this project, let's And some of it will be because we think that that's going to have the biggest impact.
Yeah.
But how you I think the blueprint is, for me, probably how you articulate what you're doing, how you're doing it, the strategy piece. But yeah, I think because I guess the maturity of this outside of HR, it's going to look different to what we've been used to as how we describe an HR strategy or a people strategy.
Yes, absolutely. I think from what you've described, I mean, your blueprint could actually will reflect and impact across all 4 dimensions. I mean, yes, if you think of the focus bit, it's been sort of in the ballpark of strategy. It's like, where do we focus and why to make the biggest impact? And then obviously you talk about impact because it's like, how will we know that we're achieving that?
Yeah.
Even just as you said, then the language is very different to the language of HR. So the language that you use in your blueprint will reflect your mindset around employee experience, but also will start to create a more mature mindset because you'll start to be amplifying that language and that thinking.
Yeah.
And if your blueprint has, sort of the collaboration points, like what you're going to do and then how you're going to do it, how you're going to do it is going to reflect on who are your stakeholders, how you're going to work together, who are your champions, your mentors, whatever it is that you need to get involved to get this over the line. So I think your involvement piece will be in there as well. So it feels like, if it's not already, your blueprint will probably benefit from reflecting each of these 4 elements. And it sounds like you might be a bit closer to it. Do you want to come back?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that a really good starting point, we've talked about this already, Julie, for crafting that blueprint actually is to use something like the maturity measure with a number of your stakeholders to see where you and your team think you're at, but also where stakeholders think you're at, and just to start dropping in some of that language to get them thinking about, oh, okay, I hadn't, because a lot of people go, yeah, we need to do this EX thing, let's crack on with it, it's just like HR, but something a little bit more. And just even the questions themselves will get them thinking about, oh, I hadn't really thought about the way we're using data or where we're putting that focus. So I think that's a really good starting point. And I mean, the way I see blueprint is really, we can argue about is it the right term or not, but we talked about the EX archetypes, which is a previous webinar that we did, but I think you're very much as, you're in that space of, being an EX architect, which we've talked about. It was your term originally. So having that blueprint, it communicates to everybody, this is what we're going to build. This is what we're going after. This is the big idea. So for me, that's why I think the word blueprint works really well, because it's a lot more accessible than strategy, which we've got, what's in a strategy, what isn't a strategy? And you might not get as far as planning. You might give that blueprint to your colleagues in internal comms. Say, right, how are you going to help build that for me? So that's why I like the term blueprints. That's the way that I see it. But I absolutely think that, using the maturity measure as a starting point for just seeing where everyone's at is a really great use of that. And I think Bee's right. I would see all 4 elements kind of being in there. So I hope that helps.
Thank you. Thank you, Beth.
You're welcome. Michelle, lovely Michelle, how are you doing? Nice to have a comment from you. Nice to see lots of people that I recognise coming through the chat. So Michelle's got a question here, Bee. In business, when this is very new concept, where would you suggest starting in one function area to test and learn? And also build a business case for more of a focus.
I think it's interesting because in the forming stage, we talk about a slightly ad hoc approach focusing on quick wins. And I think a quick win is always a winner because you've got some proof points. And often it's easier to get that off the ground if it is in one area. So yes, that can well be a really great place to start. That said, and I've never said this already, but onboarding is such a popular place to start because the business impact of getting this wrong is so phenomenal and so easy to prove. So often businesses, organizations do start by focusing on onboarding because you can get some very good proof points. Onboarding is quite complex in that it's a discrete journey, but it's quite complex because often it's owned by nobody and everybody. So if you're feeling bold, then definitely think about onboarding. If it's really problematic, then maybe just focus on one bit of it that's owned by one team. So maybe it's the first day bit or your buddy program or whatever it may be. So that's a yes and a no. Whatever you can do most quickly and efficiently to demonstrate some quick wins is often a good place to start. That would be my summary.
Yeah. Well, we just actually, another client of ours, we started with the exit, which is quite interesting because actually most of the time, you know, you kind of do some very high level journey mapping and you figure out where are the biggest pain points for our people, where are the moments that matter for our people. Right, let's start there. And nearly always that comes out as, it does come out as onboarding, induction, however you choose to define that. But with this particular client, we looked at exit, which was a really lovely opportunity to look at something a bit different actually. So the whole host of reasons I won't go into now as to why that was important for them, but that was quite interesting to look at something else. But yeah, I think just starting by, you know, doing a very quick and dirty kind of end-to-end experience map, and figuring out where you think you're going to be able to make your case most coherently, I think is the advice I would give. Pick on something that keeps your stakeholders awake at night, even that if that's not necessarily causing the most pain for your people. If you want to make that case and do some tests and learn, and you know it's going to have a significant impact on your business, whether it's reducing attrition or increasing productivity, whatever it might be, then that'll be the best place to start, I'd say.
We've got 3 questions, some are quite big and just slightly half a mind on time. So we've got one on personas. Emma, I know you'll have a good response to this as well. So Kirsty, thank you for your personas. Yes, it's so easy to get very quickly overwhelmed with personas and ends up with a plethora that are never used. We liked, so, and it, you know, the different levels of maturity, you'll have different robustness, if you like, of personas, starting very simply with demographic or pen portraits, if you like. So using the data that you have, but not overthinking it, just having something to work with to give you that employee-centered thinking and bringing the employee perspective, but not relying on them too heavily if they're not robust, and then building the robustness of them. But trying to keep with a small set, 6, 7, 8 tops, and then what we say is dress them up. So if you're doing an onboarding, dress them up to the onboarding, you know, apply different characteristics to them as relevant to that thing that you're designing for, and then almost derobe them to take them back to your quite neutral set, so you don't end up with an unwieldy set. Emma, did you want to add anything to the personas point?
Yeah, Kirsty, what I'd say is we can send you some info afterwards. We've done a webinar on personas. We've got loads of info on personas that will hopefully help. I think that for me, they are different to customer personas, because customers' personas are much more about segmentation, and obviously, you know, it's a different kind of mindset. These personas are about genuinely understanding your people, their needs, their motivations, they want. So I think that you really can't substitute that just getting out to the business and doing some kind of research that will help you get to know your people. And we've got a load of info we can send you on this, but genuinely getting to know your people, understanding what their needs and motivations and wants are, and then off the back of that, developing what we call a set of behavioural personas. So very often actually demographics turn out to be not that relevant. Doesn't matter how old people are. People are very obsessed at the moment with Gen Z. Actually, what we find is when we do the research, doesn't really make that much difference. That a lot of people want the same stuff, whether they're, you know, my age 52, I'm an X, or my daughter's age is a Gen Z. Things like tenure tend to come through more though, less about the jobs people do. So it's great again for kind of overcoming those assumptions people make, like, oh, we've got to figure out how to communicate to Gen Z. Well, where have you got that from? You know, it's a very sexy thing at the moment. Everyone's talking about Gen Z, how to communicate with Gen Z, but actually you can't box together a bunch of people that are born in sort of 10, 15 kind of, you know, window of years. It doesn't work like that. You need to get into personalization. That starts with genuinely understanding your people. And that's based on data and insights, not what you think you know about them. So that's where it all starts: going out, running workshops, getting qualitative data, analysing that and seeing what are the common themes are, and then developing your personas around that. But we've got a load of stuff that will help you with that. So don't panic, Kirsty. We can send you all that after the call. We'll have your email, obviously, because you signed up the webinar. So all sorted.
Thank you, Elena. I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name. So Elena says, sorry, I've missed one out. I'm sorry. I'm just going to go back to the question above. Sarah, then I'll come to Elena. So Sarah says, I've found these types of maturity assessments a bit tricky, looking after things at a large and global company where maturity levels can hugely differ internally. That's what we were speaking about with Margarita. But I like how you've positioned this as a framework for thinking and asking the right questions. So I'm looking forward to applying it. It's not a question, it's a comment. Thank you very much, Sarah. Would love to hear how you get on, but I do think it works very well in those sort of distributed, disparate organizations of being quite a usable approach for that. Elena, so I'm going to read your question this time. For your model of EX, I'm curious which areas you're pulling from or inspired by. Are there any functions that you leaned on more heavily? As someone who made a career transition from HR to UX and service design, I see value from different fields and love bringing them together. That's a great comment. Emma, do you want to respond to that? I've got sort of a thought on that.
Yeah, go for it. Go for it.
Yeah, I was talking to one of our EX Design Club this morning who works at a global retail business, so lots of different businesses and omnichannel within that. And he's doing a lot of work at the moment in terms of bringing people together. So he's actually doing a piece of work bringing together. So he's really looking and mapping EX to CX, so employee experience and customer experience. And he's starting to bring those tribes, if you like, together to share learnings within the organization, and also starting to map the data. So looking at what, when you do start to influence employee experience, you do start to shift the dial. How does that improve customer experience? And then getting more granular, which bits of the employee experience most impact the customer experience. And he's got some really interesting insights into how they're shifting from their L&D focus and how they level different people and how they develop people and where they focus moving people through that sort of career path and which bits of that have the most impact on the customer experience. So I do think there's so much richness in bringing together these different disciplines, methodologies, teams, departments, approaches. And I think that's where the magic happens. So I totally agree with you on that.
Yeah, I think that's what I get really excited about, people shifting into different areas and disciplines. I think, having people come into HR from customer experience and user experience and service design is really exciting, and marketing as well, whatever, and also people moving from HR into those other areas. And I think even in the book, we talk a lot about EX by design is not just about design thinking. There's a big influence of positive psychology in there. That's a huge influence on the work that we do, and other areas as well. We talk about customer experience, we talk about service design. So we absolutely, I say beg, borrow, and steal, but I think take inspiration is the right way to say it from lots of disciplines. I think that's where you really get the best outcome, where you're not just too focused in one discipline and one area. You look at what can work from other areas. So I think it's very exciting. I get excited about that too.
Thank you for your questions about who I was just talking about. Do drop me a message, and I'm funnily enough, I'm introducing to lots of people because lots of people are working on this at the moment. So if you want to know more about this, I can connect you after today. Have we, Katie? I think we've tackled all the questions that we've got so far. Shall we move to the poll?
Yeah, absolutely. So we've got a couple of polls. I'll introduce the first one, which is going back to that measure. You may recognise this question from the measure. So what's happening for your people at the moment? So how joined up is their experience? How would you rate that? So 0 to 3 would be that left-hand side of the scale, 4 to 7, 8 to 10. I can see a lot of people already starting to click their answers through.
And this is a consolidation of a couple of questions in the measure. So we've sort of simplified it just to start a conversation and get a feel for what people are thinking on this session.
Brilliant. Just give another couple of seconds. Half people have answered. I appreciate that if you're maybe dialing in from a telephone or an iPad, you might not be able to see the poll, but I will share the results in a second. Okay, I think that's slowed right down. So I'll share the results. So there we go. Can you see that there? So 47% of people actually said 0 to 3. That sort of left-hand side of the scale. 4 to 7, 50%, and 3% in that top end of the scale. So that's really interesting. Any thoughts from Emma and Belinda on that?
Yeah, so that, If you want to apply if you want to sort of relate that to the 3 stages of maturity that I talked about at the beginning, so the performing, the forming, performing, and transforming, that would put more or less 50% in the forming and 50% in the performing, with just that sort of 3% in that really mature transforming element. So that, yeah. I'm sort of quite resistant. I expected a question about how many organizations sit in bit different, each stage of this. And I think I'm always quite resistant because we're not creating a diagnostic or a benchmark. I don't want to compare apples and pears because you can't. I want to start a conversation. So that's interesting. A lot of people, obviously, vast majority in those first 2 groups, and only a tiny amount in the transforming, which feels a bit right. I think if you'd all put yourself in the transforming box, it's sort of like, yeah, job done, nothing to see here. I would raise an eyebrow at that probably. So that's interesting.
Excellent. Would you like me to launch the second poll?
Thank you. Yes, please.
Brilliant. So the second question we have here then is, what's happening behind the scenes? So going back to those questions. So how human-centered, strategic, and joined up would you say your approach is? What's happening behind the scenes? Again, I can see people's answers coming in thick and fast this time. Really interesting. Okay, I'll give everyone a few more seconds. Those of you who are able to complete the poll. Okay, it's slowed right down. So I will share the results on this poll here now as well. So what's happening behind the scenes? We've got 59% in that first category this time, and 31 in the middle, and 9%, so three people in that top end there. So back over to your thoughts.
That's shaking out a little bit. I'd love to hear from anybody who's put themselves at either end of that spectrum, and what you're doing to tackle that, if anything. So I'd love to hear from anybody who's ticked that sort of, that they're very much in that transforming piece in terms of having a joined up, strategic, human-centered approach to employee experience, and any tips that they'd like to share. Putting you on the spot. Sam. Oh, sorry, that's so weird. I saw Kim, you waving at me, and the name. And Kim, thanks. Do you want to? Thank you.
Yeah. So I would never rate myself a 10, but I did have to say an 8 on both. So there's always work to do. There's always something else that we can be doing. So I have a completely remote team who I've never met. So they've been working with me for various amounts of time, the longest 2 years, and one of the things that what I've tried to create and really been intentional about is that it's not just a safe space, but we're all learning together and we all have our part to play. So just because I'm the boss does not mean, like I can't do what the business needs without them, and they can't do that without me. So I spend a lot of time creating that space so that then when there are challenges or when there are opportunities to develop, it's much more about them tapping into what excites them and pushing the business forward. And to the point where I'm looking at some other projects, which means I'll be able to step away from the business a little bit and have them run things for me, which has been a transformational experience for me. To learn to let go, but certainly being much more human-centered and inviting them in to contributing to the strategy. I still set it, but it's about what do they hear, what do they think, how do they want to play a part. Has been a real thread for me in empowering this team who I've never met, but I love. So yeah, I don't know whether that quite answers the question, but that's certainly a big piece of what we do.
There's loads in that. Thank you. I think there's so much there about it, almost like answers the question. In the measure, we offer some points for consideration, how you might shift the dial in each of these 4 elements, but there's something underpinning it that I'm hearing there, which is like that creating that sense of space and that sense of learning and openness and experimentation, curiosity. We talk a lot about curiosity in the book, to be able to think, okay, so what do we do now, and how and why, and what have we learned along the way? So I think if you think about, moving from left to right across the path, I think there's a lot of that sort of foundational pieces there that I hear in that comment. Thank you. Emma, did you want to come back on that? You were smiling a lot.
No, it's all good. It's all good. It's really interesting to hear that. And what I would say, it brings us on really nicely to the final slide, actually, because I'm just conscious of time. And I just wanted to say, for those of you that did kind of put yourselves in that kind of 8 to 10 slot, we'd love to hear from you, because Bea and I have just been commissioned to write the 2nd edition of EX by Design. So we are open and up for collaborators and people who want to share their story. So if you want to get yourself in the book, get in touch. We would love to hear from you. So just a few sort of final thoughts to finish up here. There we go. So you'll get a copy of the maturity path and the measure to your inbox today. And we'll also be sharing a recording of the webinar later on this week. As I said, call for case studies, stories, thought pieces. So we are just about to start on the 2nd edition of EX by Design, which is very exciting. And I have to keep saying to Bea, it's a 2nd edition, not a new book. So you're supposed to update about 20% of the content. So it's like I think we're probably going to have more than we know what to do with, but we would love to feature more stories and case studies from practitioners. So get in touch if you've got something that you want to share and get out into the world. And obviously you can still buy edition 1. So shameless plug for the book if you haven't already. Kate is just going to pop the money off codes at 20%, Katie, I think it is 20% money off. Anyway, it's a percentage off. It's a good % off. And if you can leave an Amazon review, honestly, I can't say this enough. It's such a small thing, but honestly, it makes so much difference on the algorithms and everything. It just means people can find the book a lot easier. It really, really helps to kind of get it in front of more people. So if you can just rate it on Amazon, that would be amazing. We would be really, really, really grateful if you can do that. So thank you for coming along today. Really appreciate you giving us your time. Really interesting conversations and lots of interesting stuff going on in the chat. We have got a webinar coming up on personas, funnily enough. That's our next EX based webinar, so perfectly timed, and it shows that we are hopefully getting it right. We know what people want, so look out for that. And in the meantime, I can share the stuff we've done previously as well. Bea, any final words from you before we finish up the call?
No, I feel like we could have spent the whole afternoon digging in to some of these points more. So I really hope that people experiment with the path and the measure and use it to stimulate conversation, and just request, stay in touch, tell us how you use it.
Yeah, as we said, it's an iteration, so we would love to know how you get on, and we are up for collaborating further and moving on to the next iteration whenever that is the right time to do it. So let us know how you get on. Thank you for coming along, and enjoy the rest of your day wherever you are in the world, and hopefully see you soon.